Hi, welcome to the Informed Advocate Podcast. And I'm Sharon, your host, self care advocate, mental wealth activist, and wellness consultant. Welcome to the podcast. And so, for this can't call it the first, but for this podcast, we're going to talk about stress and trauma. And the reason that I want to talk about stress and trauma is because it is the underbelly of all the information that this podcast is all about. And so it will give you a better understanding of why you would be exposed to all the different discussions about what's being offered or a different way of looking at something or perspective. And so with stress, we're going to start off with the Cleveland Clinic. The Cleveland Clinic defines stress is the body's reaction to any change that requires an adjustment or response. The body's reaction to any change that requires an adjustment or response. Again, stress, not the stressor, but what it does to the body. The body reacts to these changes with physical, mental, and emotional response. Physical, mental, and emotional response. Physical response can be your heart racing. There's tension in your body, your butterflies in your stomach. Oh, your stomach hurts. The muscle pain. It can be high blood pressure. And even for some people, it can be a panic attack. It can be a heart attack for some individuals. So That's the Cleveland's definition. The next definition comes from Encyclopedia of Stress. The Encyclopedia of Stress defines stress as real or interpreted threat to the physiological or psychological integrity of an individual, which results in physiological or behavior response. And behavior response are the things that we may do in reaction to, again, going back to the perceived threat or something that's real. So this is how the encyclopedia defines stress. And then there is Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he says our thoughts can turn on the stress hormones, our thoughts. So, we can have positive thoughts or those thoughts that are disturbing. And some thoughts, a lot of times, the thoughts that are unpleasant or disturbing, they're not intentional. Sometimes they just come flooding down. That happens to me sometimes, the negative thoughts sometimes. For me, it's more ruminating. And so, again, our thoughts can turn on the stress hormone. And when it turns on the stress hormone, that's a fight, flight, freeze. It happens so fast a lot of times. That's the fight, flight, freeze, the sympathetic nervous system. And we're familiar with that. Now, when it comes to trauma, trauma traditionally are usually been defined as an event. And of course, when it comes to war or when it comes to assault or when it comes to abuse, or even when it comes to witnessing any of those things, most of the time it had been defined as it can be something, catastrophic, a tornado, a hurricane, it can be something like that too. They have always been defined as an event, but trauma is not just an event. So we're going to move on. So with Resma Minikin, he describes trauma as trauma is a response to anything that's overwhelming that happens too much, too fast, too soon, or too long. And he also says, coupled with a lack of protection or support, it lives in the body, stored as sensation. And that sensation can be pain or tension or lack of sensation like numbness. So again, trauma is stored in the body and we feel sensations. Remember that. Now, Dr. Peter Levine, or Peter Levine, I'm not sure. He defines, I believe it's Levine, stress as when bad things happen to us, our body reacts in very specific ways. What happens in trauma is our body doesn't go back to where it was before. It stays in this stuck place. A key in working with trauma in somatic experiencing is in finding out how the trauma has become lodged in the person's body, then helping them move through the stuck place. And to see it move from trauma and back into flow into the here and now. So again, trauma gets stuck in the body. Now, Dr. Beza van de Colt, he defines trauma as trauma is specifically an event that overwhelms the central nervous system, altering the way we process and recall memories. Trauma is not the story of something that happens back then. It is the current imprint of that pain, horror, or fear living inside people. So it's not always the story or the event that occurs, but it's the imprint of the event. Now, one more. Dr. Gabor Monti, he defines trauma as trauma isn't what happened, it's what it does to your body. Trauma isn't what happens, it's what does to your body. And he also says trauma is what didn't happen. He goes on to explain, such as, let's say, for instance, if you were a young person who needed someone to talk to you more, you needed someone to listen to you more, you needed someone to pay attention to you more. And even though it can be so innocent of how it did not happen, but because it didn't happen, it activated your nervous system. And so with stress and with trauma, they are related. They're first cousins. They are married. They are a couple. Now, with stress and trauma, with trauma, there's always stress. With stress, it's not always trauma. Now, that's the way that most people define it. But if we're looking at what stress does to the body and what trauma does to the body, especially chronic stress, it's really identical. The way that I would say is that stress can be traumatic because we already know that anything that's trauma or traumatic is stressful. So stress can be traumatic. Now, for each person, it's different because you can have an experience, or let's say if it's an event in the same place, and everyone responds differently. Now, what I like to say is that when it comes to stress, and I'm going to say too that I like here, we'll probably be using stress and trauma interchangeably because I'm really looking at the impact that it has on the body because it impacts the nervous system. And so, one of the things that I tell people often is that stress is like fender benders and accidents. And you don't even have to determine which one it is because your body is going to determine. Remember earlier, we talked about it's the response, it's a physiological and psychological response. And if our primal brain interprets something as danger, it activates our body, our brain. It's like danger, danger. And it's looking to see where the danger is, whether or not do you need to fight, stand up for yourself, do you need to run, flight, or do you need to freeze? It's like, okay, I can't do anything, or maybe I just pretend like I'm just not here, and whatever is going on, it will bypass. And so again, with stress, and even when it comes to stress, let's just say with fender benders, it can be subtle. It could be those things that, oh, I don't know, have you ever gotten into an accident before? Or, I mean, a fender bender before? I know I have. And there have been at least once, maybe twice. And I'm like, oh, did I get hit? And you don't even realize you got hit. Usually the next day you can feel it. But you don't, it just really is like, oh, I think the car moved, you know? So with the subtle stress, the fender benders, that can happen. It's kind of like it can be the everyday things that may be, let's say, at work or dealing with family. And this is where it's really important for us to take care of ourselves because of the impact that stress has on the body, the impact that trauma has on the body. And in the traditional sense, when we talk about trauma, especially if we're talking about trauma from abuse, or let's say when it comes to PTSD, and even when it comes to anxiety, the traditional way is therapy and with medication, and how much those things can be wonderful. But sometimes they're not effective for some people. And when it comes to trauma, and even when it comes to chronic stress, sometimes talk therapy, as beneficial it can be, sometimes it can be too much for somebody. And this is where what's called embodiment practices come to play. And so I wanted to pretty much take the time to really explain what stress is and what trauma is, because this is a baseline of how you can heal or how you can get better. And it takes some work. It does take some work. It takes some practice. But these are pretty much just so many different ways that you can do it. And by being an informed advocate, and if you are a self care giver, then this is definitely for you. So having a good understanding of what stress is and what trauma is, and even if you want to look at it separately, that's okay too. But like I said, they both activate the nervous system. And so part of the thing that we do with our own bodies is to override the nervous system when it's activated. And so this is where all of the wonderful tools, wonderful practices, wonderful things that's out there that we're going to be talking about, and what people have used, and the experts that will come along. And again, an expert is defined as someone who pretty much has and experiences something. They may not always be degreed because of the fact they're good at what they do, And so we really need to look at so many different options from different categories, from different ways in order to make an informed decision. So now you say, now Sharon, you've told me all about what stress is. You told me all about trauma and how they are related, because again, they are highly related. Like I say, they are first cousins, they are a married couple, they're related. And so one of the things I would say that is key to stress and to trauma is deep breathing. That's something you're going to hear a lot of. And you may have already heard about it. And so, what I would like for us to do is to take a moment to do some deep breathing. And what we're going to do is do it in increments of 5. Deep, breathe in for 5, hold for 5, and exhale for 5. And if and again, because you are the expert. That's the other thing. You're an expert too. You're an expert of you. You're an expert of your mind. You're an expert of your body. You know what works. You know what doesn't work. And so if 5 is not enough, you can go up. And if you want to go less, let's say 3, for a count of 3, then you can do that as well. It is really up to you. So let's take a moment. And if you're sitting down, place your feet flat on the floor. If you're standing up, allow your feet to be firmly onto the floor. And it's okay for you to lie down. I'm not going to say wherever you are, but lie down where it's comfortable. And so the feet flat on the floor, and you're going to breathe from your belly all the way up to your nose. So again, for a count of 5, hold for 5, and exhale for 5. And this time I'm going to count because I know sometimes some people, especially if this is your first time doing it, do like the count. And so inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale through your nose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's do this again. Inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now this time, I want you to do it on your own again. So inhale, hold, exhale. Now this time it's going to be completely on your own. I would say inhale, inhale, yes, and that is deep breathing. And do that whether it's a count of 5, whether it's breathing in 5 breaths, because again, we just did it for a count of 5, breathing in for 5 breaths, and then, hold it for a count of 5 and breathe out for 5 breaths. And so you can do it that way as well. You can do for 5 minutes. You can do the 5 seconds, you can do 5 count, you can do it for 5 minutes. I say do it for 5 days, and really see how that is benefiting you or not. And like I said, you can make the adjustments in the numbers if you like. And for some people, 3 is good and 3 is fine. And for some people, 5 is good. And for some people may want to go higher, go 6, 7, 8. You do what is best for you. And so another thing is to move with intention. And so moving can be in dancing, and it can be in exercising, it can be in walking. Again, whatever you do it with intention. And the other thing I want to add to this is that even though we're talking about movement, but another thing that is really good for relieving stress and for dealing with trauma is restorative yoga. Restorative yoga is really, really good. Dr. Gail Parker, she's written a wonderful book. So look her up, and I always have to look at the title. And so I know it's race-based trauma and stress, restorative yoga for race-based trauma and stress. And again, look up Dr. Gail Parker, and actually she has 2 books now. The first one is really good, and the second one is even more so because it puts into practice of how to deal with racial trauma, in which she defines, I'm saying she defines it, which is true too, but also just in general, racial trauma is not only for people of color, but it's also how it impacts everyone. And so that's another way of alleviating stress and in dealing with trauma too. And so again, and when it comes to managing things, become aware of your awareness. And that what that means is to notice yourself, notice your body, because you remember we were talking about the definition of stress and the definition of trauma. They all talked about the body, and they talked about the nervous system. And so pay attention, because one thing I even noticed about myself, I didn't always put 2 and 2 together, but the more I learned, especially about just different ways of healing and things like that, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, that is what stress is, because we do feel it in our body. I remember one time at work, there was a lot of, I would say it was really, really busy. And then it was almost like when I came to time to pause, I really felt like, I was like, I almost felt like I got beat up, You're like, do I know what it feels like getting beat up? So long ago, right? I wouldn't say getting beat up, but felt like something was hitting on me. And I'm like, oh, this is what stress is. And a lot of times what happens, especially in a work environment, we just move on. And then that is where I started. It's like, oh, I need to take a 2-minute breather. So if your job allows you to actually take a 2-minute breather, meaning, where you can step away from a situation, from your job site, even you can go to the bathroom for 2 minutes and just be able to sit there. If you need to still be there, hopefully, you can get your mind in a space where you check out for 2 minutes. And it can be 3 minutes. I would say whatever your job may allow. The other thing is that to be mindful of the present moment, is know that you are here right now, just like you're listening to this wonderful podcast which is informing you about things so you can make informed decisions about your health and about your well-being, or you can support someone else in making those decisions because there are options out there. Yes, they are. So be mindful of the present moment. And one way of being in the present moment is to breathe deeply. So continue to breathe with me. Remember that. And the last thing is to just be with whatever it is that comes up, whether it is sadness, whether it is anger, whether it is grief, whether it is happiness and joy, is to be, because this is how we're able to live a fully lived life. And a fully lived life is everything that it encompasses, the good, the bad, and the ugly as well. And to just be and accept and know that you are human with everything that you're going through, that you are not alone, and that the Informed Advocate Podcast will be sharing so many different things for you to learn, to educate you about how you can care for yourself and how you can help support others. But it starts with you taking care of yourself first. So thank you for joining me for this episode of Informed Advocate. And remember, join us on YouTube as well. And you can also go to our parent company, to our website to see what's happening when it comes to workshops and training and conferences. And if you have any specific questions, by all means, email us. And so until next time, affirm yourself. Know that you are informed. And just breathe with me. Thank you for joining.